Hello and welcome to Mulch, with me your host Rebecca and Antony. This is a weekly podcast for flower farmers who want to build a confident flower farming practice that reflects the lifestyle that you want now and in the future. Each week I'll share conversation and tips to nurture and grow you and your flower farm. I'll open conversations that flower farmers find difficult to talk about, provide approaches that will help you to make decisions, chuckle at the idiosyncrasies of our work, and always be real and honest about my own work as a flower farmer. My goal is to help you to grow a curious, confident and grounded flower farming practice that flourishes as a business that you love and are proud to shout about. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you like what you hear, please do leave a review and share the podcast with your flower farming friends. It really does help to grow a confident and successful flower farming community. Hello everyone and welcome back to Mulch. It is somehow the third week in March. The children break up for what feels like the 1 millionth school holiday of 2024 next week. I'm trying to remain in denial because, frankly, they eat me out of house and home. And on top of that, it's flipping cold up here in Leeds. It's freezing, which is such an enormous contrast to this time last year when, we were in maybe week 7 or 8 of a really, really droughty spring. I'm sure you can see and hear and feel me rolling my eyes with frustration, but literally my plants so just need a hint of sunshine here up north. How are you? I hope it's sunnier where you are. I know Cornish guys, you are doing a bit better, which is amazing. Please send some sunshine north. So today we are talking about books. A bit late because World Book Day was last week, but always relevant because the practice of flower farming doesn't change that much. There are new techniques, new mechanisms, but plants, new varieties, new hybrids, whatever, don't change that much. So I think different books have benefits for different reasons. I have a cupboard full of flowery books. I have no shame in pointing out that when I was doing exams at medical school and professional exams in the postgraduate world, I used to feel like buying a book would impart knowledge. Just having the book would mean that I knew the information. Evidently, that's not how it worked. But in my head, a new book meant more knowledge was automatically in my brain. And so I have a similar, not quite as in-depth approach to flower farming. And it was a huge learning curve for us when we first started because literally I had no knowledge or experience. It seems like such a contrast to where we are now. But anyway, that's a different story as ever. There are so many books on the shelf that I'm going to split them up into some categories for you. So we have some beautiful ones that are just for inspiration on colours and shapes and palettes. Some that are full of instructions. Now, I'm not particularly good at following instructions, but I do think that it's helpful to read through them, glance over them, and observe and absorb the information, which somehow then filters out and is applied as I see fit. Some have technical advice, and others are just useful. Now, I have to admit, there are also a number of books, older books that I've picked up in charity shops that I have not read yet. I want to, but I struggle with reading at the moment, and the text is all small and in black and white, but I can just tell that when I get as far as reading them, they'll be really useful. So one day I can't wait to sit down with a blanket and a cup of tea and start enjoying those. So I have picked 4 books off my shelf to talk to you about today. I very deliberately not picked the obvious books by growers that we will all follow. I do have a number of those books, not all of them, but quite a few. The reason I've not picked them is because I think that most of you will have copies of them or will have seen them, will have flicked through them, will have borrowed them from other growers if you haven't bought them yourself. And so I really wanted to suggest some alternatives that have equal benefit. So the 4 books that I've picked fit into these 4 headings. The first one, I go back to time and again, and it's all about technical knowledge, and it has never failed me. The second is the first book that I bought in our flower farming world, in our flower farming journey. The next one, the third one, I picked up in a charity shop, and it had clearly never been read by its previous owner, but it's a bit like gold dust, or it certainly was when I first started. And the last one I currently have 2 copies of, but in total I think I've been given 5 copies of it. I've never read it, and I keep it as a reminder to me of what I am and what I'm not. Okay, so book 1 is the RHS Propagating Plants, How to Create New Plants for Free by Alan Toogood. I don't know where to start with this one. I mean, when I started the flower farm, when we started in 2019, I remember taking a trip to one of my favourite local nurseries. It's called Dove Cottage, it's in Halifax, and it's an absolute wonder. And I bought a load of plants, got to the counter, and Kim, one of the owners, she said, "Oh, these are lovely, and those will be good for propagating soon." And I remember that as clear as day. I also remember my response. My response was, "Oh, that's lovely. I'm not going to have time for cuttings or propagating. I'm just going to buy plants." And I remember her raising an eyebrow, but serving me politely, and off I went. And over the course of the year, I bought a few more plants. She was always lovely. She asked whether I'd done any propagating, and I always said no. Fast forward a couple of years, and I had the bug. I had started trying to save seeds. I had started trying to split and grow plants of our own from cuttings. And now I'm pretty good at cuttings and saving seeds and propagating from all sorts of tiny bits. And as a result, I get to grow more plants for free, which obviously means that there is more money in the budget for other plants. Or, as Antony would prefer me to say, more money in the bank. Anyway, this book is thorough. It has wonderful, clear, labelled pictures and diagrams and comparisons and lists of other plants that techniques apply to. It's got a really, really good index at the back that helps you split your propagating for lots of the plants into seeds, cuttings, roots, and grafting and all sorts of things. I really like it. I also like the fact that it covers some of the trickier seeds to germinate. So, for example, there are a few that I found hard to germinate, and when I looked in this book, it said, well, what you need to do is crack the outer casing, remove the outer casing, and then try and germinate it. It worked. So I think Cramb is the most obvious one of those, sea kale. It's beautiful, not very useful for cutting, but really lovely flower to have. So I have the 2019 edition. That is the latest version. It's the sort of book that I think you'll be able to pick up in a charity shop or in secondhand bookshops online. I can't really imagine the older versions are much different. I just think the newer versions will have more plants and more modern varieties and similar. So next up is Deadhead, The Bindweed Way to Grow Flowers by Jerian Sabin and Ralph Thurston. I bought this book in 2018 from Waterstones, and I remember it as well. I've read it a number of times since, and every time I need just a little chivvy along, I go back to this book. 2018 was the year that I went back to clinical practice, and I was also working for the regulator alongside that. And I remember opening this book for the first time on a packed train from Manchester to Leeds. I'd managed to find a seat, and I was in a corner. I was sat next to a gentleman who was furiously typing away on his laptop. And it was raining. It always rains in Manchester. I'm really sorry if you're from Manchester and you're listening, because frankly, every time I go, it rains, which is also what my mum says about Yorkshire. But anyway, let's move swiftly onwards. It was raining and it was cold and I was wet because I'd walked to the train station, and I sat huddled in the corner and read this book. I think I almost finished it in that train journey. I didn't want to share a moment of it with anyone, and it was absolutely the fastest journey from Manchester to Leeds that I've ever done. It's honest, realistic, pragmatic. It talks about the difficult stuff and the easy stuff. It talks about successes and failures. It's my kind of book because it gives you such an honest and true opinion of how they built their business. Now, their business is very different to ours, and it's an American book, so their approach and their setup was very different when this was written, and I'm sure it's changed since. But the key thing for me is that it embodied the dream, and it's what I wanted. The third choice is The Little Book of Popular Perennials by Maureen Little. Now, this is an old book in book terms. It's from 2013, which is the same year that my son was born. So it's about 11 years old. Yikes, he's going to be 11 this year. Anyway, moving onwards. I think I bought it from a charity shop, and I knew that I bought it in about the second year of growing. It was around the time that I realised that growing kind of annuals from seed and biennials was hard work, and cutting flowers from our established plants in the garden was way easier. And so I wanted to know more. I really didn't know much about perennials. I didn't know much about cut flowers. I didn't know much about the characteristics that were required of a good cut flower stem, the sorts of things that I now feel like I know intuitively when I see a plant and I handle it. It is quite old, but it's got a really, really good grounding and firm base of perennials in it that we have, that many other growers have, and that you can cut from. It talks about plants that are good for cutting, and I think especially if you're new to flower farming, it's really helpful. So what I used to do with this book is I would go to garden centres and I would look at the plants, and I would have a look at their stems and their flowers, how well they were filling the pots, whether they were the sort of thing that I would find easy to split. I'd look at the sorts of soils they like to grow in based on the labels. And it was how I learned to spot plants with similar characteristics that I felt I could predict would be good for cutting. And I think a bit like my medical practice, there's nothing like that kind of hands-on experience. There's nothing like going to look at the plants, handling them, feeling them, kind of holding the petals, giving them a sniff, looking at the back of them, checking out the seed pods. All of those things give you knowledge about the plant that you are going to work with. And so I still do that now as I walk around a garden centre, not with a book, but I look at the plants like that to see whether I think they're going to fulfil my needs and therefore the needs of my customers. The final book is the one that I've never read. So I'm sharing this because each time I receive a copy, I am actually genuinely grateful. It means that my friends and family are trying to help and trying to understand what we do. It shows that they care, even if they consider it to be a strange career direction to move into, given my background. But I've never read it. And the reason I've never read it is because, having flicked through it, I can see that the rules in it do not apply to what I do. The rules are designed mainly to enhance the shape of a plant and its beauty in a garden. But I don't garden, I grow. I do want beauty, and I absolutely do want and need abundance. But the abundance and beauty that I need as a flower grower, as a cut flower farmer, has to be useful to my customers, and that means that the stems, the branches, and everything need to be useful, not just the pretty flower on the end. So, I'm often considerably more brutal than it suggests in this book, looking at the neat red lines. And frankly, I've often cut so heavily from my plants that really there isn't anything left to prune, giving away the title. So this book is called Pruning, Plant by Plant, How to Prune More Than 200 Popular Plants. It's an RHS DK publication, and if you're a gardener, actually I think it's probably pretty useful. But I'll always keep a copy of this, and it will always make me smile. And one day, when I garden and I don't grow, I might even read it. But for now, it's my fourth book, because I think we all need those books that remind us what we are and also what we're not. That's it for today. 4 books to recommend, 3 that I would definitely suggest that you get a hold of if you can. And as ever, please do leave a rating or a review wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps the podcast to grow, and it helps other people to find it too. I'll be back next week on Monday with another episode of Mulch relating to flower farming practice. Rebecca.
Thank you for listening to Mulch. I hope that you found it useful. To find the show notes, head back to our website where you'll find links to all the things that I've been talking about in today's episode. If you're on Instagram, you can find us at Silver Grey Foliage. I would appreciate it so much if you were able to share this episode in your Instagram stories. And if you are able to leave a review, it really will help more people to get on and grow. I'll be back with you next Monday to talk about more flower farming in practice. Rebecca.